I'm Phil Cooke, co-founder of Cooke Media Group here in Los Angeles. We're a media production company, but we also coach and consult other leaders, organizations, helping them use the media more effectively. You know, we live in a media-driven culture today. Some research indicates the average person sees about 5,000 media messages every single day. In fact, one study a year or two came out that said, when we meet somebody for the first time, because we're so distracted, we have so many things to do, so many options, when we meet someone for the first time, we decide what we think of that person in the first 4 to 8 seconds. Now keep in mind, we haven't had time to talk with them, get to know them, know anything about them, but we're being pulled in so many directions today. We have so many distractions that we've just changed our behavior to we're adjusting and making judgments about things before we even know what they are. So that's the world we live in. And so I want to talk today about leading in that kind of world. Plus, we're just emerging from a major crisis. That adds a whole nother layer onto this thing. And let me just say, when you're leading out of a crisis, you're leading in uncharted territory. We're literally off the map. We've never been there before. In fact, if things were like they always were, we wouldn't be in the crisis. But generally speaking, whatever crisis we're in, and there are a multitude of crises, and we live with them all the time, whatever that crisis happens to be, we are literally off the map in uncharted territory. So the question becomes, as a leader, you may be leading a church, a ministry organization, a nonprofit, a business, whatever it is, or trying to navigate your own career as a professional. As a leader, how do we navigate when we're off the map, when we have no real benchmarks to compare anything to? Let me give you 5 key words that I want you to remember today. Write them down, because I want you to remember these 5 key words, because I think they will help you emerge on the other side in a much stronger position to lead. Number 1, the first word is anticipation. The act of becoming better and better at anticipating the future. 19th century philosopher, author Schopenhauer said, talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. Tony Robbins said, losers react, leaders anticipate. Steve Jobs at Apple put it this way, to live in the future, you must anticipate it. We must change our thinking, change our behavior, so that we're always anticipating what's coming next. Now, we don't have a magic crystal ball. We can't tell what's coming, but I believe we can put ourselves in a position to be able to anticipate the future much more effectively. Let me give you some suggestions. Number 1, read. Read. Read about the past, read about the present, read about the future. John Maxwell said, leaders are readers, and he's exactly right. In order for us to know what's coming, we need to know what's happened in the past and how they navigated during that very difficult time. It's funny, I have film professors coming to me all the time telling me they have film students who have just invented this amazing shot for a short film they were working on, only to find out the professor said, you know what, that shot had been done 30, 40 years ago in an Orson Welles movie or in a Akira Kurosawa movie. This is not new at all because they haven't studied the past. So always think, read, study history, study everything you can, because that prepares you to anticipate the future. Another thing is to become more aware and make that a habit. I find very often that leaders get so caught up in the day-to-day, they never pause to take a look at the big picture, at the long-range solution. I think that's so incredibly important. I think that leaders today are often driven by emotion. I know one pastor that pretty much guides his entire church based on how he feels in the morning when he walks in. Everyone there waits in anticipation to see how the pastor feels. Is he angry? Is he upset? Is he happy? Because that will chart the course of the day. Other leaders are driven by the most recent email they got or a criticism they got. Here's the deal. Leaders need to anticipate the future and be driven by that kind of vision. The second word I would tell you after anticipation, the second word is adaptation. We need to learn to adapt to new and different circumstances. It's interesting that when a film producer buys the rights to a book to make into a movie, he doesn't film the book. That would be a, 90-hour movie? He has to cut scenes, restructure the story, add characters, take away characters, maybe create composite characters. In other words, he has to adapt it to what would work in a film theater, because the act of viewing a film is completely different from the act of reading a book. In fact, when they give the awards out, when the Oscars come out, the Oscar for the best screenplay from a book or a play or something like that is called Best Adapted Screenplay. Let me tell you something, in the digital revolution, in this world we live in today, we have to learn to adapt. I was in a meeting just the other day, and one of the marketing people said, look, it's easy. Going digital is easy. We just start filming what we did in the physical world. You know what? That could be maybe step one, but I'll tell you, the digital world is completely different from the real world, and we have to learn to adapt, change everything we know about making something work in the digital realm. It's incredibly important. Stop thinking about your digital options as simply duplicating the physical world, and start thinking about it in a completely different way. We have to learn to adapt, and I would encourage you, get into that adaptation mindset about every project you do, every dream you have, everything you want to pursue in the future. Think about how you can adapt to make that happen, particularly during a crisis. The third word I'd say is credibility. Credibility. You know, more than ever during a crisis, you need credibility as a leader. I've learned that the organizational chart really doesn't matter very much when it comes to a crisis. People aren't thinking about your job title. They're not thinking about the size of your office, the color of your carpet. They don't care about that stuff. They want to know if you have a strategy and a plan for getting us out of this mess. But very often I see leaders during a crisis huddle up with the people right around them. That's all they want to talk to. That's all they want to talk to. But I'll tell you what, it's so important that we look beyond that. And one important thing I think to remember is that leaders aren't made in a crisis. Leaders are discovered in a crisis. If you're not getting your ducks in a row, if you're not preparing, if you're not getting ready for that moment of crisis, when it happens, you're not going to be the leader that people need. Always remember that. Leaders are not born in a crisis. They're revealed in a crisis. They're discovered in a crisis. And that's really an important thing. So your credibility matters. This is the time to be training. This is the time to be coming to sessions and seminars and webinars like this, where you can get the information to take your leadership to an entirely different level. And by the way, while I'm on the credibility thing, let me just say, work on your level of self-awareness. Part of credibility is your ability to have an accurate understanding of your talents, your weaknesses, your strengths, your gifts. That's so important. I see so many leaders that feel like they're brilliant in an area. They're not even remotely capable in that area. I get screenplays sent to me by writers all the time that say, Phil, I'm so passionate about writing. Yeah, but you stink at it. You're terrible at it. I'm just shocked at the number of people who are remarkably self-aware of what their gifts and talents are. I heard a phrase the other day, don't seek praise, seek criticism. As a leader, we need to constantly be evaluating what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are, asking other people, reflecting on those things, because that only builds your credibility. The fourth thing I would say is flexibility. I think this is really important. During a crisis, you need to be willing to ditch your assumptions. In other words, you need to be able to admit you were wrong. We're in a crisis because we don't know what's going on. The difference, it's a different world. The benchmarks aren't the same, the comparisons aren't the same, the analytics aren't the same. And so we have to try new things, but when it's wrong, we have to be willing to admit it. And yet I know leader after leader after leader that would be willing to run his organization in the ground before he actually admitted he made a mistake. I always refer to Ed Catmull, who was the former president of Walt Disney Animation and Pixar. He said, the leader needs to admit their mistake early enough so they can make a correction and still make the deadline down the road. And he was referring to filmmaking, but it's true of just about any project you can possibly imagine. The earlier you admit your mistake, or the earlier you admit that maybe this was not the right choice, the quicker things can change and move in a whole different direction, which could change everything. I think, the thing to remember is that people are not looking for leaders who are always right. They're looking for leaders who are always real. The trust factor here is really an important issue. The more you're willing to admit you were wrong, take it on the chin, change direction, and move on, creates trust in your people. So many leaders mistake it and think that their people are going to think they're idiots. No. The quicker you admit a mistake and be willing to listen to other members of your team, change the strategy, change the direction, and correct the course, the more you build trust with that team. And the fifth word I think is so important is creativity. Learn to lead creative people. During a crisis, creativity could easily be your roadmap out. They did a study a number of years ago. IBM interviewed 1,500 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. And they found out something really interesting. They said the single most desirable trait for a leader in the 21st century is creativity. It wasn't financial management, it wasn't organizational expertise. It was creativity. Let me tell you, we're driving toward a creative economy, and people who can lead creative teams and lead creative people are the ones who are going to excel. So now is the time to start becoming comfortable at leading creative people. You may not feel like you're terribly creative yourself. I happen to think that we're all wildly creative, much more than we think. In fact, studies indicate that there is no proof that some people are born creative and others aren't. And yet, so many of us have grown up with the attitude that, well, I'm just not creative, and that's why I became an accountant, or I'm not creative, that's why I went into this area or that area. But I'll tell you, we're all incredibly capable of great creativity. We just need to bring it back up. It's like a muscle that needs to be exercised. But at a whole nother level is the ability to lead creative people. And you don't have to be a creative genius to do that. You just need to understand the principles of how to inspire, motivate, and lead creative teams. I'll tell you, as I said before, during a crisis, creativity is almost always the roadmap out. And we need to be listening to the members of our creative team and really valuing what they do. Let me just give you those 5 words again, because I think they're so important. Anticipate the future. Adapt to the new reality. Be credible. You want to be an authority. I just think this is so incredibly important because you want people to trust you. Be flexible. Admit you are wrong. Be willing to change your strategy. I get to so many organizations. I was at a major nonprofit a number of years ago, and the donor development guy literally had lost 65% of the giving during his tenure. But he would not change because he was absolutely convinced he had the right strategy. I said, man, if I'd lost 65% of my giving during my tenure, I would think that's a giant red flag that could not be avoided. But he was absolutely convinced that this was the right thing, moving in the right direction. He was stuck. Don't get stuck. Don't get stuck. Be flexible, because we live in a world of accelerating change. Never forget that. And the 5th thing is respect the power of creativity and learn how to lead creative people. I think the faster you learn that, the better. So anticipation, adaptation, credibility, flexibility, and creativity. If you can master those 5 words, I think it will dramatically transform your ability as a leader during a crisis. And let me just say this, the future isn't starting tomorrow. The future is starting today. And the faster we can learn these principles and these techniques, the sooner we'll be in a position to lead our teams forward. Thanks so much for being a part of this session. You can reach me at philcooke.com. I'm Cooke with an E, Philcooke. I write, I blog, I do podcasts on these very issues. I think living in today's digital age, particularly coupled with coming out of an incredible crisis, a major crisis like this is an important time. And we need to think about what we can do to step up and be the kind of leader your team, your organization, your community actually needs.